Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Fall.
Hello, Michael. How are you doing this evening?
Hello, Barry. I'm good. I'm well. How are you?
I practice my funny voices every time, we do this.
My
weird intonations.
And I try to dial in like I'm going to get a different question one day. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. And I'm excited, as always, to be discussing critical media studies with you, my fine and trusted and time-tested interlocutor. Time-tested.
Yes.
Because this is our 101st or something like that episode.
We're past 100. We've been doing it.
We're past 100 plus episode. And another reason why I'm happy to be talking about our reading, which I'll discuss in a moment, is that this particular reading was recommended by, I don't know if we have her last name, but the first name will do, that we have Gabriela from Barcelona, who wrote us a very kind, encouraging email and made this particular recommendation of a reading. And I searched out the book and passed it on to Michael, and we both agreed it was indeed, as Gabriela suggested, perfect fodder, as we will discuss, perfect fodder for critical media studies. And one reason why it was such perfect, ideal fodder is that Fonctuberta, well, I should mention the reading. We're going to be talking about one essay and perhaps following up with another essay. They're short in our next episode. But this week, we will be discussing the opening essay in Juan Fontcuberta, his 2014 book called Pandora's Camera. And we read it with great delight. I guess there were two. Let me say this before we go any further. One reason that both Michael and I read this with perfect delight is because Mr. Fonctuberta is a fine writer.
Oh my God, yeah.
Really an excellent stylist. And even in translation, his prose is lucid, interesting, compelling. And the other reason why we're excited to be talking about this on critical media studies, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Rapici, did we not rebroadcast an earlier episode by Andre Bazin?
That's correct.
On the ontology of the photographic image. One of the reasons why Gabriela's choice excited us beyond Fonctuberta's immense writing style and skills is that his range of references, he often mentions writers that we have discussed in other ways and in other formats throughout previous episodes of critical media studies. So there's just a lot to say. And we will try to say those things in a short, relatively compressed point of being. Michael, did you have a comment before I commence?
No, I was just chuckling at the promise that we're going to do this succinctly and in a focused manner.
No, probably not. We will probably not get past the front door, but we're going to try. And we do want to say again, thank you, Gabriela, for not just the recommendation and not only for your words of support for the podcast, but also for recommending such an excellent book for us to discuss.
Yeah, Barry, I will jump in real quick. I just want to say this is not the first time that we've had listeners suggest readings, and I don't think we've gotten one that hasn't been interesting, because it's sort of, sure. It coming from outside, it's typically a new way of thinking. Yeah. So I'm a fan, and I'm sure you're a fan. So for those of you listening, if you have something that you'd like us to read and talk about, by all means, shoot us an email through the website and we will probably do it.
Well, I'm very glad you elaborated on my comment. That's absolutely fantastic. We are excited. So since we're excited, let's begin, shall we?
Indeed.
So we're going to begin at the beginning. We're talking about an essay called Opening Chapter, I Photograph, Therefore I Am. And the allusion to Descartes is not an accident, dear listeners. It's not an accident. as will become apparent in the second paragraph that I'm going to read forthwith. Oh, before I do that, Michael,
Yeah.
I know we're lingering at the front door, but this is relevant to the essay.
Sure, sure, sure.
Should we talk about the basics before I read the philosophical moment? Should we talk just should we mention the basic conceit of this chapter, like the basic theme of this opening chapter
In terms of the
about the
photograph of
photograph
his
of the
father.
yeah? Could you do that? I know you would do it more succinctly than
Well, I
I
don't
would.
know. So
Go ahead.
he's writing about a photograph that his father, who was stationed abroad, I believe
Yeah,
World
yeah.
War II,
World War
right?
II. It
Um,
was an assignment
he,
and kind of
he
not a glamorous. It was
no,
interesting. Not a
quite
very
sort of
glamorous
boring,
assignment.
boring.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he and I guess a group of his fellow soldiers pooled together the names of the girls they knew, shared the addresses, and started writing to them.
This is
And
proto Tinder. Speaking of
this is
critical media
in fact,
studies,
he
this is
does make
proto
note of
Tinder.
that. He says, I'm not surprised that people meet on the internet. This was the analog net, right? So
Right.
his father writes his mother cold. In this, in fact, it's funny. I was chuckling earlier as you were talking because your language this evening is much more floral,
Glory.
and dare I
I'm
say
trying to match.
baroque
You know what
than
I'm
it might.
doing.
It's tough,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah.
Writes her, and she writes back and says, "Look, this is fine. We can do this, but you have to drop the affected tone. We're not going to do it this way." And he writes back, and this is where the essay sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Focuses itself.
Focus
Uh,
is constant. Yeah, right,
he writes back and he includes a picture of himself
right,
that his mother instantly falls in love with
right.
and sort of
The
concretizes the
woman that would be
relationship,
his mother. The woman
the
that would
woman
be.
that would become his mother.
Yes,
And so Mr. Fontcuberta talks a little bit about the fact that he believes that this picture was probably taken by what's this phrasing for it? He's got a term for a Minuteman. These
right,
internet
right.
photographers who sort of take the picture and goals to get it back in a minute, and that's what gets him talking about photography and connection and the relationship. So this is really a an analysis of his sort of family history,
Right.
and which he then sort of deconstructs into a more philosophical
That's it.
analysis of the image.
You just use the P word, not photography, but philosophy. And indeed, he is using this personal, very personal, couldn't be more personal anecdote or bit from his personal history in order to essay larger philosophical questions, including some of the key theorists of photography as a media art, some of whom we've discussed, like not in this essay, but people like Walter Benjamin later, Roland Barthes in
Yep.
this particular chapter, and of course Siegfried Kracauer, who we discussed not in terms of photography or on the subject of photography, but in the subject of film. So without any further ado, let me begin with his beginning and talk about one of the places where very immediately Fonctuberta brings up philosophical issues that you may or may not have considered in relation or as being at stake when we're talking about photographs and photography. I'll start from here. The fact is, that it could be easily so, because for more than a third of a century, photography has been my passion and the activity that fills my life with meaning. Nor are we hinting at some philosophical undercurrent, despite the resonances it spontaneously engenders in the mind. Descartes propounded the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, to which his contemporary Gassendi responded ambulo ergo sum. Descartes existed thanks to thought. Gassendi thanks to movement and action. Nowadays, we exist very casually and very nicely he makes a kind of an announcement of a modern way of thinking and
Right.
our modern way of thinking that he associates with photography. So nowadays we exist thanks to images, imago, ergo sum. The adaptation of the corollary to our condition is homo pictor gives us I photograph, therefore I am. Because there is no doubt that the camera has become one of the vital, I almost said viral,
Hmm.
has become one of the vital contraptions that encourage us to venture into the world and traverse it, both visually and intellectually. Whether we realize it or not, photography is also a form of philosophy. So that's kind of a statement of many statements of intent in there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a comment before we pursue this?
Not yet. Were you going to finish the paragraph?
Oh, I wasn't. So
No, just
I think that was a hint. I think that was a hint.
well,
I took a hint.
I do want to go two more lines.
Okay,
He
let's do
says,
it.
this being so, perhaps we should refine the scope of that proposition by breaking it down into at least two variants. In
Mhm.
the, excuse me, my gosh,
Good luck with that.
I
Good luck.
can't, in the, the hortatory, prephrastic mode,
Paraphrastic.
paraphrastic mode. I'm
Paraphrastic.
sorry, I don't have my glasses on, I should say. I photograph, therefore I exist because the camera effectively certifies existence. And in the passive, I am photographed, therefore I exist, which is, I think, important that, we talk about
Oh, you're right. Go ahead and finish that because it's really important. And I forgot Walter Benjamin gets invoked here.
in which form the aphorism will sound familiar to anyone who has wrestled with those theoretical reflections that derive from Benjamin. It is the presence of the camera that makes an event historifiable.
That actually, I wanted to read that the bulk of that second paragraph because he very immediately it announces Fonctuberta's shift to the or interest in the philosophical issues underpinning um, photography as he sees it. But I also asked you to comment. And I don't know if there's much to comment on except in those last two sentences. So
Right.
I'm glad you read them. So let's ponder this moment and we'll both I will ask you, but I think we should both ponder this for our listeners and invite our listeners to, to think about it and
Ponder
ruminate
along.
and ponder along, ruminate along, meditate along. So he takes, as you pointed out, he kind of moves past both Descartes and Gassendi and saying, well, their photography is important for claims of existence in the time of modernity. Um, and he does a very quick sketch or a quick gesture toward a way of thinking about the ways in which we exist or the connection between the photographic image and contemporary self-understanding of identity.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just very briefly reread those two sentences that you read, and then, like I said, I'll pose it as a question. In the hortatory paraphrastic, which means paraphrastic, I believe, just means movement, rhetorical movement. I photograph, therefore I exist because the camera. No, paraphrasis is different. I got it wrong. I'm not going to look it up now. Just our dear listeners will look it up. It doesn't mean movement. I think it just means something about rhetoric. I'm not going to get into digression. Uh,
Indirect, meandering, roundabout,
that's it. It
convoluted,
is being
oblique.
okay. Yeah, it does mean movement. It means being beyond the. It means digression. Actually.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, there he says he points two things. Um, yes, I photograph, therefore I exist. But then he points out very quickly this is true not just in one way, but in two ways. So, yes, I photograph, therefore I exist. So there's a passive understanding of that. I am photographed, therefore I exist. And then there was another one. The Walter Benjamin was the second kind of meaning or gloss on I photograph, therefore I photograph, therefore I exist. It
Well,
means I am photographed, therefore I exist. And that also the photograph, the camera rather, the camera is there for
Well,
me to exist in modern history.
so it's two ways. I think it's two sides of the coin. And I think
Right,
if you read
right,
this backwards, right? So, Benjamin, it is the presence of the camera that makes an event historifiable. To me, there's, again, it's which side of the coin do you want to look on? On one hand, this is social, it is documentation, it is proof of existence,
indeed.
right? So if we look at the story behind this chapter, right? The
Right.
father's sending the picture. I am photographed. I send it off. It is proof I exist. This is who I am. This is the embodiment of me. But on the other side, there's also this element of being photographed that creates this sort of personal. And I think we're going to
Absolutely.
talk. We're going to talk.
Subjectivity. It creates you as a subject and gives you the feeling that you are a subject because I was photographed.
Yes. It's proof I was,
Yeah,
so I think that there's a social element, but there's also sort of a memory element, like this idea that we're freezing things.
very much
And
so. But that memory element is subjective, right? That
yes,
memory element, it's precisely that makes it, gives it a kind of subjective component, along with the objective component, as you said.
yes,
That is a beautiful gloss. I think we're into the groove here, Michael. Let's accelerate. Let's move to
indeed.
the next passage. Now, the next passage, before I read it, it's a little bit further on in I Photograph, Therefore I Am, the first chapter. This is kind of one of the reasons why I thought Bazin, let me just very, very, very briefly, I promise, just gesture toward the essay, the artist podcast episode last week, where we were discussing a rebroadcast of an episode on Bazin and the ontology of the photographic image. In that essay, he makes several memorable claims between uh, uh, several memorable claims and also memorable contrasts between painting and photography. But and basically he makes a memorable contrast that photography can supplant painting and in fact any kind of pictorial art because it's mechanizing it, because in a way it's more perfect than
Right.
any human rendering is. And what we've always wanted from art, especially from painting, but we also want in language and any art, we have wanted to fulfill our desire to be immortal. And so considered in that way, photography gives us both a more efficient and therefore more suitably modern, but also just like an improved, technologically enhanced version of what the painting, no matter the genius of the painter, could never quite deliver. And so finally, we have the thing that most suits our heart's desire. Um, One of the things, so implicit in that argument about painting, and so Bazin has all these comments about how emperors and pharaohs always wanted their portrait taking. And there was this idea about the face, the idea that art is something that exists primarily to spite death in the face of death, that there is some intimate relation between art and memory and art and mortality. And so, and that there's something supremely important about the face, that the face in particular is what made us interested in facial representations, especially of the most important people in societies. And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, photography would make this a mass thing because there's always been this assumption that human identity, which is what the art form tries to immortalize, the human identity is somehow there in your face. Somehow something about your face is crucial to the identity. Okay, that's probably enough of a warm up to go to this second paragraph that I'm reading. And yet we insist, second paragraph, and not it's a couple pages in if
Right,
you're
right.
following home, but and yet we insist on seeing the human face. So this is a continuity between ancient times and modernity.
Hmm.
So he's talking about ruptures and transitions, but interestingly enough, like Bazin, he kind of assumes, Fonctuberta kind of assumes, that there is a kind of continuity here between the different technologies, literal technologies of reproduction. Yet we still insist, I added still, on seeing the human face as the mirror of the soul, at once the most intimate and the most externalized, right? The most
Hmm.
external aspect of the subject. The screen on which her psychological interiority, this is what you were talking about earlier, right? There's a subjective and an objective
Right.
element. The screen on which her psychological interiority meets the coercion to which public life subjects her. Michael, your comment is totally verified by the grammar of that particular sentence, right? Like the photograph is that which negotiates subjectivity, personal subjectivity in public life,
Right.
right? Let me go a little bit further. The face is at once the site of revelation and of simulation, of indiscretion and concealment, of spontaneity and deceit. In other words, of all that permits the configuration of identity. In front of a camera, one is always different. The goal makes us the designers and managers of our own other, but we are the other. So that's it. Now here. I think Fonctuberta, even though he's invoking Barthes, I think he's going into his own groove thing here, right? Because there's this idea that the photograph, or at least he's going further than Benjamin, because I don't know if I recall in Benjamin this idea that through the pose, the camera gaze, the combination of the camera gaze and the pose turns the self, it doubles the self.
Hmm.
You are simultaneously your simulacra, your facade, but also you are other to yourself.
So I have a question for you about this because the first time I read this passage to mean that this other, I interpreted it as if this other self, right? So he says, in front of the camera, one is always different. The goal
Yeah.
makes us the
Yeah.
designers and managers of our own other.
Yes.
My
Yes.
first reading of that was connected, I was connecting what he was saying to an awareness of being photographed. And that somehow in that transaction, we become an other. But as I'm reading it this time, as I've thought about this a little bit, I'm wondering if it's not so much that, but as you had just said, the simulacra, like there is now a double of me.
There is now a double of you.
And
Yes.
so that's how I'm understanding this now, right? The front of the camera one is always different. In other words, because this gets us, we were talking earlier about the initial passage that we read about I'm photographed, therefore I am, or I am because I photographed. This tension between sort of this distinction between a social version of this and then sort of this internal memory that photography either invokes or forecloses upon, depending on how you want to parse that. I'm wondering if this isn't just an extension of that, this idea that this other
Mhm.
is now
Mhm.
something separate. It is now a social artifact, right?
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
but also now a subjective memory because it's frozen. It is now again an artifact that can be internalized and reflected upon.
Absolutely. I'm shaking my, no, I'm not, I'm shaking my head in emphatic agreement. Please
Yes,
continue.
okay. So I mean, like to me, and I don't mean to jump ahead, and I certainly, we'll continue along this track, but I think that all of this is really sort of wonderful preamble to the discussion on punctum and studium. This
Oh,
idea,
I don't think you're moving ahead. I just wanted to underscore one thing you said
yeah,
because I think it was very, very helpful. And then I think we're going to go immediately to the passage a couple pages later that you were alluding to and that we wanted to talk about. But you clarified something that I was getting or was trying to get at in my earlier comment when I after I read the passage. There is a way that so I too, Michael, uh, seized on immediately this idea that when you pose, you're putting a mask on in a way. The pose for the
Right.
photograph for the camera
Even just the
is
smile.
like a mask,
Yeah.
right? It's a mask, and in that way, it's another. But I think he is talking about something more profound, and in direct keeping with the opening. I mean, this is very carefully wrought. He's a very not just an excellent stylist, even in translation, but I think the logic and the structure of the essay is really exemplary because I think he is indeed returning to the like his opening statement that there is a word in which we are an other because the photograph itself becomes not just an other, but in a sense, an objectification of us. It's an other, but also an objectification. It's not necessarily
Well,
a subject.
it's an
Yeah.
us that doesn't belong to us
It's an
anymore.
us that does not belong to us. And as such, it has a social existence outside of us. But and here's the final bit I would add to that. That we it once that once we once the I is objectified in that other realm,
Hmm.
then we in turn can enter a new relationship with
With
ourselves.
ourselves. Yes,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
that's really fascinating. That's really fascinating. Is that the photograph almost becomes a sub. Now I was talking about the photographic image as an object, but in a way, really, what he's saying is that the photographic image of you becomes another subject in the world that you have to dialogue with and you have to bear.
And it's I think to take that a step further, it's an uncomfortable dialogue.
And indeed, it's an uncomfortable. You have to bear. That's why I said bear. Like you're
Right.
gonna have. It's a burden.
Yeah.
It's a burden. Anyway, anything you want to say, or shall I
I think
say?
that was it.
But I think it's to note. This is such a carefully constructed essay because I think his examples, he really is emphasizing and kind of unpacking some things that he sort of casually, seemingly casually, drops in the very
Now, he's
beginning.
a wonderful writer. I
Uh-huh.
really
Yeah,
enjoyed him.
yeah. Okay, so let's get to. I think we agree this is kind of the meat of the essay. There's so much in these two
Yep.
paragraphs. So this is kind of the heart of the episode for those listening at home. Woo-hoo. We're This
We're
is the
here. We're
dramatic
here.
moment. This is
We're
the
here.
crux. This is the crux. So he's referring back to the photograph of his father that was
Captivated his mother.
captivated his mother. Thank you for the verb. What was it in that portrait that captivated my mother?
Borrowed it.
To return to the Bart of Camera Lucida, the thing that triggers the sequence of thoughts that leads Bart to explain the concepts of punctum and studium, is another portrait of his mother in a winter garden. Have you? I haven't. I admit
I've not.
a subject for another essay. We both need to read. I was about to say I haven't read it in its entirety. I read a little bit of it, but I've read enough of Camera Lucida. That definitely should be on our to-do list for critical media studies. But I do want to say, interestingly enough, it's also about parents. It's about his love for his mother and the ways in which most of his comments on the photographs have to do with photographs of his mother who had passed, and he sees photography as a kind of memento mori,
Okay.
so that's an important thing, but maybe that's by the by. Let me continue in my reading. The thing that triggers the sequence of thoughts that leads him to explain the concepts of punctum and studium is another portrait of his mother in a winter garden. However, Bart chose not to reproduce this portrait in the book, limiting himself to describing it instead, because he understands that the punctum is informed by personal experiences that are not transferable. I would, at this point, define the punctum, but very helpfully, Mr. Fonctuberta is going to define it. The punctum, quoting Barth, that which is given as an act of grace only interacts with the experience, private by nature, of a particular observer of the photograph. The image of the winter garden symbolically replaces a missing loved one and would therefore fail to illustrate to anyone else the idea of a punctum that condenses, precisely for Barth alone, a profound sense of loss. So, do we need to gloss that before we go on and talk about Kracauer, or is there anything to say? Is
Um,
that sufficiently made clear what the punctum is?
I think just to because I think this is really important and it's an interesting idea. So he's
Yeah,
got
let's talk about it. Yeah,
the
what's a
punctum and
studium
the
first?
studium. So
What?
as I understand these, the studium, the difference, the distinction between the two is
Yes,
public, is essentially public and private.
yes,
And
yes.
the studium is sort of a social or cultural understanding or agreement in terms of,
This image might be interesting. That this
well,
image,
but yes,
right?
I was going to say of meaning,
Sure,
right? Like
sure.
so
Yeah,
if you take the
sure.
idea that a photograph or a painting is imbued with a certain meaning,
Significance, right? Meaning
significance
is
is
the right
right,
word.
is that would be the studium. The punctum is a private meeting where the
Absolutely.
actual the heart of the matter is obscured. It's not present.
It's
So
not obvious to another, and here's where it's subjective, tied to subjectivity and memory, as you
right.
were mentioning earlier, is that not everyone's going to get that association,
Well,
and so therefore you're not going to get the punctum.
no one is going to get the punctum
Yes,
other
yes,
than the person for whom that meaning
right,
exists. So,
right.
but it is possible, right, that I don't know if you and I at different times both went to, say, the Grand Canyon and had a moment or meaning of significance. We can, you have a photograph of the Grand Canyon, right? The studium there would be some sort of American cultural understanding of grandeur or power or just, something along those lines. You
Indeed,
and I would have dis- different hidden, like meaning only to you or only to me,
indeed.
which would be the punctum.
Indeed, indeed. And an easy way for let's use the Grand Canyon example for a moment. I've never been. Have you been?
I've been past it, but I haven't stopped. No.
Well, okay, we're going to gesture toward an imaginary world, an alternative universe, just to make the point
Right.
briefly, where I haven't been, but you you lingered, Michael.
Right.
You
I
lingered,
was
you
there.
saw it. So we could both see the studium. We're both interested in pictures of the Grand Canyon.
Right.
But what that image wouldn't be able to confer to both of us equally would be the punctum.
Correct.
Because I would be looking at it, and to be honest, I would say probably I haven't been there. So this is yet another picture of the Grand Canyon, this place I haven't been. Whereas it could potentially, this could have a very different punctum for you.
Right.
Uh,
And so I think it's important to note this, that the notion of punctum, and I think this is fun. I'm just going to try and say this as many times as I can. Now that
sure,
word is fun,
let's do it.
right? Is not necessarily present in all images for all people.
Indeed, indeed,
Because it is idiosyncratic, right? I mean,
indeed,
it's
absolutely,
whereas
absolutely.
the studium, I wonder about this because
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, it's public. We agree to this.
Yeah,
But I also feel like at a certain point, and the internet creates an interesting scenario for this, where
interesting.
an
Yeah, let's hear it.
an overabundant, well, so they change, right? Like if you think of a meme, for example, that's the perfect example to me of studium, right? We all culturally agree this means X or this means Y. But I wonder if at a certain point, an oversaturation of an image potentially degrades or erases or changes what that meaning is.
Well, that is fascinating because I I am not well versed in in Barthes in the secondary source criticism of
Right.
Barth, but I do know that many people push back on there being well, two comments. Number one, from the little I know of secondary source criticism on Barth and Camera Lucida, I do know there are people who push back on the idea that punctum and studium can be so readily differentiated. But second, I would say, you know what your example immediately reminded me of?
Mm.
Speaking of critical media studies, because I'm always thinking of our previous episodes. You know what your episode about what your comment about the possible the de-sanctification, the de-realization of reality through the photograph. What you immediately reminded me of is our
Mm.
recent episode on Nausgard, on Carl Nausgard, because that was his argument about what technology does to nature,
Right.
that it gives us this false proximity because we know the image, and so therefore we think we know reality, and we
Right.
get bored with the reality because we're oversaturated, to use your word, with the image.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a step beyond that though, because it's one thing to be bored of something. Well, maybe not. I was going to say, but on the other hand, what I'm just talking about here is more like well, no, I can see that. I wonder if I wonder if changing your association with it, if just a different orientation to it is somehow different than being bored. But I think we're we're running perilously close to getting into the weeds here. We should
Okay,
probably.
well, let's not get in the weeds, but I do have to say this. I do love whatever our problems with it, or everyone's problems with punctum.
Mhm.
Like you, I do love the word, but also I have another thing I love about it. I think it's a beautifully suggestive, it's not just a beautiful sounding word to me, it's a beautifully suggestive word, because what he really means by punctum is puncture, point.
Yes.
And so it's like, it's a wonderful way of conveying, it's how I remember the difference between punctum and studium. The punctum is that indefinable thing that kind of punctures your consciousness, kind of pricks your
Right.
consciousness.
Right.
And that's interesting. It's like, and that's going to be different. The thing that pricks your consciousness, that punctures your composure in the face of the image. That's really fascinating. That's an
Is it that way?
interesting
Is it
point.
is it puncturing your consciousness, or is it puncturing the sort of social consciousness of something and injecting?
Well, I mean, from what I know of Bart, it is the former, not the latter.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And once you start talking about sociality and social context, you're in, according to him, and
Mhm.
like I said, there are critics who wonder whether or not you can make a rigid distinction or a clear cut distinction between it. But in his text, from what I know of it, Studium pretty much talks to that realm, that describes that realm of sociology.
Okay. All right. Well, shall we soldier on a
Yeah,
bit?
yes, we shall. We shall. Well, we're going to photograph. We're going to soldier on
Into Krakauer.
into, yeah, and a kind of contradiction, or a kind of contrary argument to Barth. For our maître à penser, master of thought, photography embodies Barth. Photography embodies a symbolic death. The click of the shutter guillotines time, freezes the gesture, fossilizes the body. Even in translation, he's a cool writer. Every photograph is a promise of eternity at the cost of our seeing ourselves as future corpses. The image remains when the body will be, is no more. And it, and if for Bart, photography kills, for Siegfried Kracauer, had he mentioned Kracauer before?
He
I
did
missed
not.
that.
This is the first time he invokes
Oh,
Krakauer.
oh. Well, then why didn't he say Siegfried? That's weird. Anyway, I would count him off on his essay. I mean, lucky he wasn't writing for my class, right? For Siegfried Kracauer, what it really seeks to do is banish photography, a very contrary argument. For Siegfried Kracauer, What photography really seeks to do is banish the memory of death. In a much earlier essay, Kracauer took note of a portrait of his grandmother as a young woman when she was a film star and compared it with the mental image he had of her. Photography for Kracauer did not help to recall the essence as it does for Barthes. When he sees the photograph that he describes of his mother, he feels the photograph captures the essence of the mother.
Wait, say that
Photography,
again. Say that again.
um, Barthes feels, I mean, the reason that
Yes. No, I'm
Barthes
sorry.
feels the punctum.
I thought you were talking about Krakauer for a second. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, no. I'm about to talk about the contrast, right?
Yes.
So for Barthes, there is this idea that the photograph does sort of summon up the essence of his mother. That's the punctum. Photography for Kracauer did not help to recall the essence. On the contrary, it distorted memory. The human being is not what he appears to be in his photograph, but the sum of what can be extracted from him. Photography destroys him when it portrays him. The features of men are conserved only in their history, unquote. If we take the photograph, it is in order to hold fast to moments of life and so forget the existence of death. The mission of photography would be to eclipse the very idea of death. So that seems to be Krakauer's idea.
Yeah, I'm confused a little bit by this. Bart is the image for Bart, the punctum for Bart is almost, it seems almost
Memento
sacred.
mori. It's a memento mori.
Yeah, it's almost sacred, right? Like
Yeah, right, right,
it is an effect. And I think the fact that it stands in for the subject
right.
makes it that much more powerful.
Indeed.
Krakauer has a different take on this. The image that he sees, I think, because, and so I have a spin-off question is my little synopsis here. So he sees an old picture of his mother before he knew his mother. And this gets
Yeah.
us back to that idea of the other and now being a social artifact and losing track of ourselves. I am because I've been photographed, but it is devoid of those personal memories. And therefore, since we think of a person in terms of the sum of our experiences with them, this image violates that, right? It introduces a new context that is foreign to us, and therefore the person also becomes foreign in this way.
Hmm.
Is that fair?
Yes, it is. Yeah. You
So
suggest
is
touching.
this is yes, so is this all photography? Like if Krakauer happens to see a picture of his mother from his youth,
It distorts memory, he
it just
says.
it doesn't, yeah, but is that, even if he has memories of that,
Yes. The human
is
being
it
is not,
because it's external? Is that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Barry. I apologize.
please, please.
Is that because it's external to him? Like my memories are internal, right? That is mine. No photo. That's it's not the punctum, but it's a substitute version. It's an altered version of that. It's something that is mine and mine alone. And so this image of a person, or this image of an image, because of the fact that it is very obviously something other than my memory, but attempts to represent my memory in that sort of in that sort of orientation, it necessarily violates or perverts the memory. Is that correct? Am I understanding that right?
I, well, I would, I'll say, I'm going to cop out here. I'm going to say, I think so. But I have to say, I'm sharing as I read over the sentence, and I'm going to read it over quickly here, as I read over the quote from Krakauer, I have to say I'm struggling a little bit with it because it does seem to be saying something counter or different in my reading. It says Krakauer is saying something very different. Let me work through this.
Yeah.
He seems to be saying something very different from the point that Fonctuberta takes from, and summarizes at the very end of the paragraph. So let me read you the sentence. Um, I interpret this sentence that I'm about to read in the way you do. So I'll reread the sentence. The human being is not who he appears to be in his photograph, but the sum of what can be extracted from him.
That's
I
memory.
take it to mean memory,
It's
personal
memory.
memory, right? Okay, the punctum in a way.
Right. Right.
Photography destroys him when it portrays him. Okay,
Now hold on.
now,
That ellipsis that follows him,
yes, yes,
we could just use because
yeah.
the features of men are conserved only in their history. A man exists only in so much of my memory of him, my experiences with him.
Well, then, okay, all right. Yes, I agree with that.
So
But
then this image destroys, challenges at the very least, and in challenging it destroys my memory of him.
indeed, indeed. Okay, so we both are reading the quote the same.
Right.
But then, in which case, what the heck does Fonctuberta mean with his last sentence?
Okay.
The mission of photography would thus be to eclipse the very idea of death. No, I mean, it sounds like the photograph is not eclipsing the idea of death. It's contributing to the, it's not eclipsing the idea of death,
Well, no, slow down. Slow down.
promoting death. It's promoting death
No, I don't think so. Because I
and
don't, okay.
oblivion.
The human being is not he who appears to be in his photograph, but the sum of what can be extracted from him. You're
Yeah,
not the picture, you're my memory of you. Okay.
right.
Photography destroys him when it portrays him. The features of men are conserved only in their history. Got it. We're in agreement to that point, right? Okay. That notice there's a little quotation that ends that. I'm assuming he's quoting Kracauer there.
Yes, indeed.
So Fontcuberta says if we take photographs, it is in order to hold fast to moments of life and so forget the existence of death. That's the attempt of the photograph. I think he's breaking from Kracauer here for a second. The mission of photography would thus be to eclipse the very idea of death. And see, let me go with this for just a second and see if we can rectify our little confusion here. Far removed from these glum, how do you pronounce this word?
Necrolatry.
Necrolatries, death. I see photography, on the contrary, as linked to life rather than death. So I have no problem in publishing the photograph of my father, not just because it is surrounded by circumstances that are heartwarming, undramatic, but also because I am convinced
Oh,
that there, where the photograph as a manifestation of life cannot reach. So this photograph for him, I think this is where you have memory and punctum and sociality converging. Okay. I am convinced that there, where the photograph as a manifestation of life cannot
oh, that's
reach,
great. Yeah,
we
yeah,
still have words,
yeah.
which are another effective way of constructing ourselves. So I think what he's saying is, on one hand, you have Barthes, for whom the punctum stands in for the image. In removing the image, we rely on our memory and we don't have Kracauer's problem. Right. So I don't know that Kracauer and Barthes are really that different from each other, because because Barthes not saying like, I'm not going to include that. My memory stands in. So take a picture of something else and let my memory do its work. Kracauer says the same thing. When you take a picture of something, you challenge the memory, and in doing so, destroy everything. And Fontcuberta is basically saying, look, I don't agree with that. I don't have a problem with that, because I have that third piece that nobody's talking about, right? You've got memory, you've got the
Beautiful.
social, but we have words. And I think this goes down, like there was an inscription on the photograph that his father
Yes, and
had sent.
that's where I was going to go to. Why don't you
Okay.
read that? And I have a comment on the.
Actually, I don't have the
Well, I was about to segue from there. I have a
okay.
comment on what you just said. I think you beautifully solved the riddle. And I want to return to the sentence you read, which was key. the last sentence you read about the photograph as a manifestation of life can a
A man,
manifestation of life cannot where the photograph as a manifestation of life cannot reach, and the need for words. I want to return to that,
yeah,
but um, but I will do that only after I read the passage that we're kind of near the end
yep,
of our adventure with Fonctuberta. Um, so immediately after the passage Michael read, the brief chapter ends this way. For if readers are unable, even with the background set out for them, to grasp the condition of punctum in the portrait of my father, I do not find that troubling. For this particular chapter of our history, the only thing that matters is that the punctum went straight to my mother's heart.
mm-hmm,
So the photograph works regardless. And I'm going to go back to the sentence you read and connect it here. Um, and your brilliant comment, Michael, makes me realize is I thought he was using Kracauer to correct Barth. He's not really.
no, I don't think
He's
so.
finding an insufficiency in both. And he is also very neatly, very cleverly defending his own practice. Because what he really says is in order for photography to be existentially fulfilling, you need the supplement of words a lot. You need the supplement of writing along with the photograph. The photograph alone poses a lot of problems, existential problems, even as it records or, in a sense, stands to verify our existential existence. But I interpret this sentence, the one you read, as a kind of defense, not just a defense of writing, but he's saying, I just told you a story about the significance of the photograph. You don't even have to see the photograph, although he reproduces it.
Right.
What you do need to pay attention to is my story. And the story I'm conveying in words. So as he writes, I'll just repeat it, the sentence you read. But also because I am convinced that there, where the photograph is a manifestation of life cannot reach, we still have words. My gloss is, or my addendum would be, we still have words. We can still tell stories about the photograph,
Right, right.
which are another effective way of constructing ourselves.
Love it. God bless writing teachers and English teachers. That's what we need.
Writing is really important. We think so.
it's
We think so. We like that message.
but I think I like the way he put this together. It's convincing. And I think that in an interesting way, the podcast that we just recorded is an example of this. We've had this whole discussion about a picture that nobody's seen. And it still makes
It doesn't
sense.
matter. Yeah, it
And
doesn't
we
matter.
did a hack job compared to his writing. I mean, his writing about this is beautiful. You could read this and not see the picture.
Right.
And so it really it alters the way that we can look at and engage with photography. I think that it deepens the idea of the photograph in a sense to say that it is more than the image. It is a social act. It is a personal act. It is a verbal act as well as being a visual act. And
Indeed.
that it
A
can exist.
discursive act. A
That's better
discursive.
said. That's better said. And I think that it can exist compellingly as any single instance. But I think that his argument here is really that when you combine them, when you realize that there is a personal and a social and a discursive story behind every image,
There you go. There you go.
that then you can
There you
realize
go.
the true power of this medium.
There you go. That's very well said. Michael, I've been waiting the whole episode to say this. I think we reached our punctum. I think we reached the terminus
Well,
point
you've reached your
of our.
punctum, pal. I don't know.
Oh, them's fighting words.
We're done. But see, the words do it. Yes. No, Barry. This was quite a bit of fun. I really enjoyed this. And Gabriella, thank you so much for the
Yeah.
suggestion. It was really a joy to read this. And Barry, I really enjoyed talking about it.
Thank you, Gabriella, and thank you, Michael. And I think, yeah, terminus. We're done. Thank you.
All right. See you soon.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.